Girivadhari. Yasodanandana Prajagana Ranjana. Yasodanandana Prajagana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Bihari. Gopi Janavalabha Girivanadhari. Valabha Gopi Janavalabha Girivanadhari. Janavalabha Girivanadhari. Yasodanandana Vrajagana Ranjana. Nandana Vrajagana Ranjana. Yasodanandana Vrajagana Ranjana. Nandana Vrajagana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Kakavacharya Satarya Satashishi Mada's Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Gauda Vaishnavinda Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Prem Sakho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki His confounder Srila Prabhupada Ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shama Kun Radha Kun Giri Govardhan Ki Vrindavan Dham Ki Mayapur Dham Ki Navadvip Dham Ki Jamuna Maya Ki Ganga Maya Ki Tulsi Devi Ki Bhakta Devi Ki Shri Shri Radha Golokananda Ki Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. So continuing our reading of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela, chapter 10, text 87. We're about halfway through this chapter. Om Aganda Tamaranda Shakana Jana Shalakaya Chakshu Mitamina Tajmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Extending to the borders of the river Sindhu and the Himalayan mountain valleys, these two branches expanded throughout India, including all the places of pilgrimage, such as Vrindavan, Mathura, and Hardwar. We're talking about Sanatana Goswami and Rupa Goswami, these two. 88. The fruits of love of Godhead, which fructify on these two branches, were distributed in abundance. Tasting these fruits, everyone became mad after them. The people in general on the western side of India were neither intelligent nor well behaved. But by the influence of Srila Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami, they were trained in devotional service and good behavior. Purport. Although it is not only in western India that people were contaminated by the association of Muslims, it is in fact that farther west one goes in India, the more he will find the people to be fallen from the Vedic culture. Until 5,000 years ago, when the entire planet was under the control of Maharaj Pariksit, the Vedic culture was currently everywhere. Gradually, however, people were influenced by non-Vedic culture and lost sight of how to behave in connection with devotional service. I lost my place. Srila Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami were very kindly preached the bhakti cult in western India. And following in their footsteps, the propagators of the Chaitanya cult in the western countries are spreading the Sankirtan movement and calculating the principles of Vaishnava behavior, thus purifying and reforming many persons who were previously accustomed to the cultures of Mlechas and Yadavas. All of our devotees in the western countries give up their old habits of illicit sex, intoxication, meat eating, and gambling. Of course, 500 years ago, these practices were unknown in India, at least in eastern India. But unfortunately, at present, all of India has been victimized by these non-Vedic principles, which are sometimes even supported by the government. So Prabhupada's taken the opportunity here to talk about how the preaching expanded from Bengal. Lord Chaitanya sent Rupa and Sanatana. They were the first two, and then many others came after them to spread this cult of the Harinam Sankirtan. But primarily to reestablish religious principles. This is the point Prabhupada's making here, that these gradually through society, these principles of primarily the mode of goodness diminish over a period of time. We have talks about the Muslim influence at this particular time. Northern India was hugely influenced by the Muslim influence. Here they specifically talk about the western side, which is Delhi and Vrindavan. And they said less so on the eastern side of Bengal. But if you read Chaitanya Bhagavat, there's oftentimes talking about the influence, even the language infiltrated the in Bengali language, and where Bhaktisiddhanta would point out that this is like in the Chaitanya, there's a word, this is from a Muslim word that means such and such, because naturally, the languages are going to intertwine to some extent. You're going to keep the basic context of the language, but the influence oftentimes show up in these different, subtle different areas. Slang terms and these types of words, he often corrects that. He doesn't change the actual language. In the purport, he'll point out what the root word, where it came from. And oftentimes he would talk about there are other versions of, say, Chaitanya Bhagavat. In this version, it says this, and this version will say that. Sometimes 2 or 3 versions. Primarily because, just like we have versions of Bhagavad Gita, there are different versions of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and also versions of Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Bhagavat. So there are other different versions, because these were all handwritten. And then you have different commentaries. Different people would give commentaries on it, and so their commentaries would be written down and added to. So these influences over time, in the worst possible cases, in the literature. And we're primarily talking about here, Prabhupada is talking about the Varnashram Dharma. That's the culture. When we talk about Vedic culture, that's the culture of India. Varnashram Dharma came in Treta Yuga. Satya Yuga was the first yuga, and then you had all the pillars of religiosity were there. There was austerity, truthfulness, cleanliness, and the fourth one, it'll come to me. Mercy. So these 4 pillars, and so by each one, and then the primary form of religious practice was meditating. That was the Satya Yuga. Treta Yuga, it became sacrifice. People performed sacrifices, was the primary form of religion. And so each one of these pillars were lost. And then in Dwapara Yuga, it was deity worship was the primary. And now in Kali Yuga, it's chanting the Lord's holy name. And then just some truthfulness is really the only leg left. There's some truthfulness left in this Kali Yuga. And truthfulness is very important, because we're talking about the influences of these different cultures and how to maintain the Vedic culture, or primarily the Vedic knowledge is the primary. So therefore, that truth has to be there for that part of the philosophy to remain. Because in the Vaidhi platform, knowledge is what compels us forward. That's the basics of what generates our faith. And that strengthens our faith as we make progress. Without knowledge, there's really a sentiment. So philosophy without is a sentiment. And then what's the it's a sentiment, yeah. And then philosophy without religion is mental speculation, yeah. So our faith is strengthened by literature, like Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the primary literature. And so if we're not reading these books, and if we're not studying, then we become weak in our faith. It's very easy, because then if somebody can influence us by some other philosophy, I think one of our biggest competitors in society is the scientific community. It's not really any other religion, because even though it's not like my God can beat up your God. That could be unless it's a person's complete fanatic, religious fanatic, then you could have, to a certain degree, some type of conversation. But to a scientist, an atheist who doesn't believe in God, then there's challenges, way beyond challenges, who think that science has brought us so much. And so some cases they could, you can argue, especially in the areas of medicine, they could say that, like maybe penicillin, or if we didn't have this, it would be. But ultimately, the death rate today is the same as it was 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 10,000 years ago. It's 100%. Even though they say, okay, sometime in the future we're going to be able to deal with this. But the reality is they're not going to be able to deal with it, because their science doesn't understand the science of karma and the soul, the nature of the soul. And therefore they have these, like COVID comes, they're just there's these other diseases, they come. But science, you can see that science also brings us all kinds of other things. I mean, global warming. It's directly related to so-called advancement in society. And plastic. Science has brought us plastic. And how much problems these things. I mean, you can actually just, if you took the time to think about it, there's a lot of things, when you argue with somebody about science, there's a lot of things that, now that given a little bit of time, we can see that they've, not everything they're matched up to be, they're everything they've claimed to be, because they've created a huge amount of problems. Of course, it's all linked now to global warming, whether it's plastics, automobiles, and these are all could be linked together, but they can argue that it's better. But Prabhupada, his basic argument is people think because they move from a hut to a skyscraper, that alone is advancement. We got air conditioning, so they'll argue we got air conditioning in the summer, so this is what science. But these things not helping us understand who we are as a person, and what our relationship is. See, these types of knowledge aren't helping us in that category. And which is the most important. If you spent your whole life and you're happy because you had air conditioning in your house, but you don't know what your soul is, don't know who you are, don't know where you came from, then ultimately what is the value of that life? So science is a big competitor. We're Prabhupada talking about here preaching, and that the devotees, like everybody in this room, everybody is expanding that process. Gradually, Prabhupada started the process. Of course, now he's saying here that it was started by Rupa and Sanatana Goswami. Of course, it started by Lord Chaitanya, but gradually the process is spreading continually. And obviously, a huge leap that was made by Srila Prabhupada. It's an enormous leap. I mean, it's not too many people that can actually say they changed society, world society. You could probably count them on your hand, one or two hands, how they've had such a big impact on society. Just say like Abraham Lincoln might have had, and George Washington might have had a big impact on society. But then Prabhupada would be a part of that, how he changed the world. So it's he's in a extremely rare, but you could say it even more so. But how he changed the world by the influence that he had on society at large. This is the amount is enormous. I mean, there's some credit. Even there was these articles. I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, they had like CNN did a poll about the most influential people after the age of 50, 70, and like Srila Prabhupada was one of them. So there was some recognition in the Western society to a certain extent. But preaching is not. But we have, this influence to a certain extent. Even raising kids. There was some competition with society because they have an influence over your kids. They go to school, they have all these other. So you're competing, as you're trying to educate them to a certain degree against what they're hearing outside the home. So there's these influences. So the more we're prepared, the better we are at being able to counter these types of influences that are discussed, that Prabhupada's talking about here. He talks about one source, but there are many sources of this influences. Okay. 90. In accordance with the directions of the revealed scriptures, both Goswamis excavated the lost places of pilgrimage and inaugurated the worship of the deities in Vrindavan. This is one of their instructions from Lord Chaitanya, purport. The spot where we now find Radhakund was an agricultural field during the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. A small reservoir of water was there. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu bathed in that water and pointed out that originally Radhakund existed in that location. Following his directions, Srila Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami renovated Radhakund. This was one of the brilliant examples of how the Goswamis excavated lost places of pilgrimage. Similarly, it is through the endeavor of the Goswamis that all the important temples in Vrindavan were established. Originally, there were 7 important Gaudiya Vaishnava temples established in Vrindavan, namely the Madan Mohan Temple, Govinda Temple, Gopinath Temple, Sri Radha Raman Temple, Sri Radha Shyamsundar Temple, Radha Damodar Temple, and Gokulananda Temple. We'll read later, I think it's in the Madhya Leela, that Sanatana Goswami, when he was going to, I think I mentioned this last time, picked up a book about excavating, archaeology, and because one of his instructions was by Lord Chaitanya to find out these places and reestablish those. Vrajanath, who is the grandson of Krishna, I think, also did the same thing. Went to Vrindavan to reestablish. There's a nice story with him and Pariksit Maharaj, who came to Vrindavan, and the story is, if you go to Govardhan and you go to the Kusum Sarovaya, to the left, there's like a little temple there. You kind of like you're going to Kusum Sarovaya, but you kind of go right before you get to it. You turn a little bit left. There's a temple there. It's a temple where they worship Uddhava, and he's a creeper because he wanted to be a creeper. But they came there, and they on a pilgrimage, and some of Krishna's queens also they came from Hastinapur and Pariksit Maharaj. So Uddhava revealed himself to them, and that marks a spot there. And he was going to speak Srimad Bhagavatam to them, but he told Pariksit Maharaj he had to go do something. He said, "Your time it's not your time yet to hear Srimad Bhagavatam." He hadn't heard it yet, and he had some mission or something, and he was excluded and sent off on another mission. But then he spoke this pastimes of the Lord to them. So that's right there, the base of Govardhan. So these excavating these places, all these little places like that, were located by the Goswamis. How do they, know which places? Some historical places, through villages and stuff, they establish them. And sometimes, whether it's through a dream or somehow, like Lord Chaitanya. I remember I went to one time was in Mayapur, and we'd go on these different pilgrimages. You rent a driver and a car, and this is where we want to go, and they take you. And one place we also normally get somebody from the temple there who's familiar with the area and go take them with you. It's from the called the Dham Seva department. You can just go to that room, the Dham Seva, and they have guides, and they can make it established. Anyway, we went to this one place. It was supposed to be Sachi's birthplace, and somehow that Ishkan had got the property. It's out in the woods. It's out far out in the middle of nowhere. It's out in so we went there, and then just it's a whole place. We wanted to see it, and then right next to it, I guess the lot over, there's a group of people over there. Said, no, this is it over here. So there's, and sometimes these things can mean revenue for if this is the location, then you get people coming. It's a stream of revenue. So there was like, no, that, so Ishkan's establishing what was told at their place. But it's like a housing, no housing available, but there's like 2 lots of land that close together, but there was nothing around anywhere in that area, but just a sample of what they have to deal with when they reestablish these different holy places. Even we see that Bhaktivinoda Thakur establishing Yoga Pit was a huge controversy when he established where the proper location of that is. And I just read Chaitanya Bhagavat, Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada said that there are few people who know actually where the Ganges used to flow. And I guess it's not that far from there, because it's always changing its course, and it changes its course occasionally, due to whatever monsoons or whatever caused it. But it occasionally changes, and so it's. He points that out that I guess It's in the book, but could be lost to time if you don't know exactly where it's at. But now we have these places established due to the mercy of these Goswamis. It's very important, these places. Because just like when people come here, I mean, this is it's really become a holy place, this little small temple. You know, it just repeatedly people come and they feel it. They're just, you know, unless there's something, you know, really, you know, even the last driver who brought the greenhouse, you know, he feels there's something. What is this place? As soon as they come on the property, there's something there that they can't put their finger on it, but they know there's something, whether it's special or some energy. They feel the energy. They know that there's something going on here. They might not be able to explain it. Of course, they ask, what's going on, you know. And of course, that opens up a whole, you know, opportunity to communicate with him. Okay, 91. Sri Raghunath Das Goswami, the 46th branch of the tree, was one of the most dear servants of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He left all his material possessions to surrender completely unto the Lord and live at his lotus feet. Purport. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur writes in his Anubhashya, Sri Raghunath Das Goswami was probably born in the year 1416 or the 1494 Christian era in a Kashyatha family as the son of Govardhan Baju Madara, who was the younger brother of the then Zamadir Hiranya Majum Adara. The village where he took birth was known as Sri Krishnapur. On the railway line between Calcutta, Burdwan is a station named Trishta Bagda, known also as Adi Satagram. And about 1.5 miles away is the village of Krishnapur. So here you see this in Prabhupada also in Chaitanya Bhagavat. They give you a landmark where these places are, because historically it's important to maintain these because things change. Railway stations are pretty a good landmark. You know, they're pretty established. They don't really going to move, you know, unless they rebuild it. But they're pretty good way to establish locations. The temple of Radha Krishna Govinda is still there. In front of the temple is a large open area, but no large hall for devotees to assemble. A rich Calcutta gentleman named Haricharana Ghosh, who resided in Simla quarter, recently repaired the temple. The entire temple compound is surrounded by walls, and in a small room just to the side of the temple is a small platform on which Raghunath Das Goswami used to worship the deity. By the side of the temple is the dying river Saraswati. I think it's completely dead. They could see it from a satellite. This is one of those things that talk about the literature being supporting faith. The Saraswati has disappeared, but all the literatures talk about this river. But now with satellites, they're able to actually know now where this river. They can see where this riverbed is. So archaeologists, and even in India, are excavating different places along this what was a riverbed, and finding different places that are spoke about in these literatures. The forefathers of Srila Raghunath Das Goswami were all Vaishnavas and very rich men. His spiritual master at the home of Yadananda Acharya. Although Raghunath Das was a family man, he had no attachment for his estate and wife. Seeing this tendency to leave home, his father and uncle engaged in special bodyguards to watch over him. But nevertheless, he managed to escape their vigilance and went away to Jagannath Puri to meet Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This incident took place in the year 1439, Sakab, and 1517 in the Christian era. Raghunath Das Goswami compiled 3 books named Stavamala or Stavavali, Dana Charita, and Mukta Charita. All these books are available in English. He lived a long time residing for most of his life at Radhakund. The place where Raghunath Das Goswami performed his devotional service still exists by Radhakund. He mostly completely gave up eating, and therefore he was very skinny and weak of health. His only concern was to chant the holy name of the Lord. He gradually reduced his sleeping until he was almost not sleeping at all. It is said that his eyes were always full of tears. When Srinivasacharya went to Sri Raghunath Das for preaching in Bengal, Sri Raghunath Das Goswami granted them in the Gora Gandesh Deepika. It is stated that Sri Raghunath Das Goswami was formerly the gopi name Rasa Manjari. Sometimes it is said that he is Rati Manjari. So there's this whole pastime of Raghunath is explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, very elaborately explained. And he's actually the acharya of worshipping Govardhan Shila. That worship of Govardhan Shila was established by him through Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya gave him a Shila that was given to him. And it said that Shila was, but when Lord Chaitanya gave him this Govardhan Shila and a Gunjamala, and it said that Shila was constantly wet from Lord Chaitanya's tears. It was constantly soaked. And that Shila was given to Raghunath Das Goswami. And then he, along with instructions on how to worship that Shila. And this information, the story was told more elaborate, including how he was able to escape from his family. And then even after he escaped, his father would send money from somebody. Here, just you take care of this money. If he needs anything, give it to him, because he wouldn't take it himself. But eventually, through stages, he even told that person, he would use some of that money to serve Lord Chaitanya, buy things for a nice meal and cook for Lord Chaitanya. That was the extent of what he took from that person. But then eventually he just cut that person off, because in some sense, even when someone gives you money like that, there's a little bit of control they have over you. So there's no renunciation as long as there's some little bit of control, as long as you have a little bit of attachment in that way. And he was using it to serve Lord Chaitanya, but he knew that it held him back just completely in his renunciation. So, of course, we know how renounced and austere Raghunath Das Goswami was. I mean, the extent of his austerity is amazing. And when he first came, he would eat with Lord Chaitanya, and they would give him a little bit. And then he stopped eating with Lord Chaitanya, and then he would at the Jagannath temple, they would distribute prasadam to all the, and he would get just a little bit there each day. And then eventually he gave up that, and he would go to the cowshed where everywhere they discard the rice, the old, and he would pick it out and wash it just a little bit. His austerity was amazing. And then Swarup Damodar found out about this, because, where's he eat? Because Lord Chaitanya would keep, track of what's going on. What's he doing now? What's he doing this? His devotees, always want to understand what they're engaged in, what their activities are. Kept up with them. And it's a very important, as a spiritual master, to keep track of what the disciples are doing, because then you have to always make adjustments to make sure that they're making advancement. So he heard through Swarup Damodar what he was doing. And Swarup Damodar actually first took some. He saw the nectar, because he knew the Lord Chaitanya came, and he snatched a little bit. And then he wanted to get some more, but Swarup Damodar stopped Lord Chaitanya, this is not proper. But he looked at this as the wealth of Raghunath Das Goswami. So this will be a lot of stories. These stories will be told in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. 92. When Raghunath Das Goswami approached Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at Jagannath Puri, the Lord entrusted him in the care of Swarup Damodar, his secretary. Thus they both engaged in confidential service of the Lord. The confidential service was the personal care of the Lord. Swarup Damodar, acting as a secretary, attended the Lord's baths, meals, rest, and massages. Raghunath Das Goswami assisted him. In effect, Raghunath Das Goswami acted as the assistant secretary of the Lord And this is a lot of the stories we have from the Chaitanya Charitamrita are coming from these two, Swarup Damodar and Raghunath Das Goswami, primary. And then you got Mukunda, who also recorded for primary a lot of Lord Chaitanya's early pastimes. So these devotees actually took notes and wrote things down and kept, I don't want to call them diaries, but to a certain extent, they regulated things. Yeah, they wrote down things. And so we're so fortunate, Even Prabhupada, there were some devotees that took diaries. And, of course, now we have a lot of books that are written sometimes 30 and 40 years later about their pastimes with Srila Prabhupada. And there's some, like this one book I read, Satsarup. He was, for 6 months, he was Prabhupada's secretary. He did everything instead of, like, traditionally they had, someone to cook his meals, and then he had a secretary who did the secretarial work, and he had Prajuma who did, the translating, helped with the Sanskrit. But for this period of time, Swarup Damodar did everything. He did the cooking, the secretary work for a period of 6 months. Satsarup, I'm sorry. But he kept a diary every single day. So there's a book, 6 months with Srila Prabhupada. And so you know that how accurate that book is, because it's just his diary. Of course, he did the whole, work on the Leela Amrita, which is everybody sent in their stories. And, of course, and there were so many of them, you could, not get them all in there. But these diaries, proved to be very important. Harishari also did a very diary. Primarily, a lot of them are based on their memory. And then, of course, there's different books about even the London Yatra. You got Mukunda's got a book. Guru Das come out with a book. And there was another book by the devotees in London called When the Sun Shines. It's about their whole entire yatra. All these books are really, to me, they're all nectar. And but they're Leela. These are Leela. They're not like, in the sense like Srimad Bhagavatam, but they're Leela. And it's just so sweet to hear these different devotees. I just finished reading has this When the Sun Shines, because that title came from when Prabhupada was there. He said, when the sun shines in England, it's the most beautiful place. That's where the title came from. So now I'm reading about the German. But a lot of these stories are like reading them over again, because I've read pretty much everything in these stories. Of course, now Jadharani's book was even nectar. I read that one before, as The Art of Spiritual Life. That's an amazing book. She's an amazing devotee. And so it's completely different, as you get and even there's another book is by Umapati Swami, was a Swami, but he was there at 26 Second Avenue. His book is just, each one of these books so these are old books. This is an older book too. He did like in the 90s. So anyway, these are nectar. These and we see that the point here again was that Swarup Damodar and Raghunath Das both are responsible for a lot of this, what we're hearing, reading about in this literature. 93. He rendered confidential service to the Lord for 16 years at Jagannath Puri. After the disappearance of both the Lord and Swarup Damodar, he left Jagannath Puri and went to Vrindavan. 16 years, we say that 1517 he came there. 1517, Christian era. I think Lord Chaitanya left in 1534. He left. So does that add up? I don't know. I just read that in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, 1534. His 500th anniversary was 1986, I think it was. Lord Chaitanya's 500th anniversary. And so, as his appearance, and so he stayed 48 years. So, no, it's going to be 2034 is when. Yeah, so it's 1534 when he left. Okay, not that, 93. He rendered for 94. Sri Raghunath Das Goswami intended to go to Vrindavan to see the lotus feet of Rupa and Sanatan, and then gave up his life by jumping from Govardhan Hill. purport. Jumping from the top of Govardhan Hill is a system of suicide, especially performed by saintly persons. After the disappearance of Lord Chaitanya, Swarup Damodar, Raghunath Das Goswami keenly felt separation from these two exalted personalities. Therefore decided to give up his life by jumping from Govardhan Hill in Vrindavan. Therefore doing so, however, he wanted to see the lotus feet of Srila Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami. Thus Raghunath Das Swami came to Vrindavan, visited Srila Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami, and offered them his obeisances. These two brothers, however, did not allow him to die. They accepted him as their third brother and kept him in their company. Because Raghunath Das Goswami was an assistant to Swarup Damodar, he knew much about the about the external and internal features of the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. Thus the two brothers, Rupa and Sanatan, always used to hear of this from him. Raghunath Das Goswami, this is probably like they had all the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, 16 years there. They've spent a total of probably less than a year each, 6 months, 8 months at a time. Raghunath Das Goswami gradually gave up all food and drink, but a few drops of buttermilk. As a daily duty, he regularly offered 1,000 obeisances to the Lord, chanted at least 100,000 holy names, and offered obeisances to 2,000 Vaishnavas. Day and night, he rendered service within his mind to Radha Krishna. And for 3 hours a day, he discoursed about the character of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We have many things to learn about bhajan, the purport, or worship of the Lord. By following the footsteps of Raghunath Das Goswami, all the Goswamis engaged in such transcendental activities as described by Srinivasacharya in his poem about them, Krishna Tirthanan Gana Nartana Paral Prema Mrita Tambo Nidhi. Following in the footsteps of Raghunath Das Goswami, Srila Rupa Goswami, and Sanatan Goswami, one has to execute devotional service very strictly, specifically, by chanting the holy name of the Lord. Chanting is the primary function of Vaishnavas. It's without chanting, it's the nectar that inspires us to read this philosophy. It's the energy there that really is the antidote that counters this influence of Kali Yuga. It's the medicine that we have to take on a regular basis. We have to have a regular diet of this, regular diet of reading, regular diet of the whole process that's given to us by Srila Prabhupada. That's why it's so important that this method of worship that Prabhupada gave us is protected. And this is the primary function of the GBC, that they protect the method of worship that's been left behind by Srila Prabhupada. Because when it goes, then it's, we got 10,000 years, which is what Prabhupada described as an opportunity for people to take up this process. And I was just I'm reading the book in the German Yatra right now. And so, trying to think of the devotee's name that first went there. He lives in Prabhupada Village. Huh? Shivananda. He couldn't speak maybe a little broken German. I mean, a few words here and there, didn't understand any German, but he went anyway. But it didn't really matter, because when he sat down and just chanted Hare Krishna, they went out in the public, put a rug there, and they chanted. Another devotee, Krishna Das, came. It took a little while before they actually got a German-speaking devotee to come. But that transcended everything. That they were going to be able to communicate just by this chanting. He didn't have no books to pass out, nothing, no literature. They eventually got a mimeograph machine where they were able to, but then they couldn't even speak, the German. So it took a while to get any literature. But just because the chanting. And then the devotees later comes and join. They talked about Shivananda saying that he would try to talk German, but they would just all say, it was just gibberish. They couldn't understand anything that he said, even though he would speak a few words of German, it was completely gibberish to them. It didn't have no meaning. But the kirtan and the chanting, that's what made it happen. Okay, thank you very much. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Harinam today, yeah, so speak the language of the soul.